Welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation. We are the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center, or HDIAC, one of three IAC domains in the DoD Information Analysis Centers operating under the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Our informative webinar series highlights current and emerging research and technology developments. It presents an opportunity for accelerating the DoD's leverage of these advancements by increasing awareness and fostering technical collaboration. HDIAC serves as one of the premier information research partners and curators of technology advancements and trends for the Homeland Defense and Security community. As such, our organization supports those working in the Homeland Defense and Security domain of DoD research and engineering. We do so by helping navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information, allowing our customers to get a head start on their technical projects. With an understanding of the Homeland Defense and Security DoD research and engineering landscape, we provide research and analysis services. We help unlock access to information, knowledge, and best practices from government, industry, and academia to stimulate innovation, foster collaboration, and eliminate redundancy. We hope you enjoy this webinar presentation and that it serves as a catalyst for community collaboration and improved DoD Homeland Defense and Security research.
Okay, good day, everyone. My name is John Clements, and I am the technical lead for the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center. And I would like to welcome everybody to part 3 of HDIAC's Brain Health mini-series. We're presenting this mini-series in addition to our regularly scheduled monthly webinars. And the goal is to highlight the tremendous amount of research into the health of the brain, which is the most complex organ in the body. Decades of research by thousands of people worldwide have led to an increased understanding of how the brain functions and how it impacts our operations when it's injured. However, with each answer, multiple new questions tend to arise. So part 1 of the mini-series started in the beginning, discussing the SAVERS program and baselining for the brain. And this was presented by Drs. Amy BAIR and Catherine STARNES, who are returning today to present their webinar today. Part 2 explored the mental health of soldiers and their families who have not deployed and may suffer from a form of survivor's guilt. And this took place during May, which was Mental Health Awareness Month. And that webinar examined a longitudinal study done with hundreds of soldiers and their spouses. So if you missed parts 1 or 2, you can go and check them out on the HDIAC YouTube channel. Today, we welcome back Drs. BAIR and STARNES to discuss neurofeedback, or NFB, and methods to modify brainwave activity to the benefit of the warfighter. And finally, on July 17th, we examine methods of using cognitive and ocular motor functions to assess service members who have suffered a traumatic brain injury. And again, if any of those dates don't work for you, you can always catch them on our YouTube channel. And the slide presentations are posted to the HDI website with the webinar announcements once the slides are ready. If you need the slides for today's webinar, they are up on our website. You can go to HDIAC or hdiac.org/webinars and find today's webinar announcement. And I'm just now also posting a link to it in the chat, so you can go down and download the presentation there. If you have any questions for the presenters, there is a Q&A function. There's a small ellipses menu in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you can click on that ellipses menu, open up the Q&A, type your question in there. That's the best way to ensure that I'm able to see it, and I'll read the questions out loud to the presenters at the end for the benefit of anybody on the phone and for the presenters themselves. And with that, I would like to introduce today's webinar presenters, Drs. Amy BAIR and Drs. Catherine STARNES from Marine Corps Special Operations Command to present their webinar on rewiring the brain for optimized performance. And I will turn it over to them.
Thank you so much. We are just so excited to be back for another round of sharing our program and our intervention data with you. As he said, specifically our neurofeedback intervention is what our focus is for today. So we will highlight our SABRES program, where the information kind of started from, and our follow-up with the intervention is going to be our bigger focus. So certainly check out our April webinar for more details about the program itself, but we really want to dig into the data today. And we have a lot to share with you in regards to that. Certainly, we know that there's many brilliant brains tuned in there today, so we're excited to hear your thoughts and insight on what we do and measure and where we can go from here. This is just our first dive into this data. It's been an ongoing program, and we're just starting to get our numbers into fruition to start telling our story. So this is kind of our first shot at this is what things we're starting to see and how we can make that move along as we here. So I'm trying to advance my slides here and they're not advancing. 1 second. Okay, so we have our standard disclaimer. As you all know, working for the government, they're not going to claim us unless we do something brilliant, and then they'll take all the credit for it. So we're just going to share with you our passion today, and hopefully that will ignite some excitement and make our government officials happy with what we do. Here's our agenda layout. We'll give you a brief overview of what the SABRES program is all about. As I said, focusing in on neurofeedback as our main intervention strategy, where that played into a lot of data goals and challenges. You think you have, the more numbers, the merrier, but you'll see once we started to get into it, it created some interesting dilemmas for us to solve. So we tried to tackle it by breaking into some outcome tracks. So we're going to give you some of the initial analyses from that. And then as well, it's an ongoing project. So next steps and conclusions, and then open it up for some Q&A at the end here. So looking at the SABRES program, it has a very fancy title, Special Operations Assessment Baselining Readiness Evaluation System. Essentially, our mission was straightforward. They wanted us to figure out the best systems, the right test, how we can gather some meaningful data to better understand and support our brain work, and most importantly, actionable data. What can we do about it? How can we use this to the benefit of our service members to keep them into the fight and to optimize their performance most effectively? So we got at it at a very comprehensive level. You can see various arrows going in different directions here, with a holistic survey giving us that broad, big picture view. What are they doing to help and hurt their brain and their cognitive performance? CNS vital signs was our neurocognitive attack to actually see the brain in action, capture some overall performance outcomes across some broad dimensions of reaction time, processing speed, attention, working memory, those types of metrics. And then the specialty of SABRES is really looking under the hood. So we know that they can perform and they can perform well, but to what extent are they doing this as far as a, is there a slide change? I just saw a note there. Are you guys seeing a SABRES change here? Sorry.
So Dr. BAIR, it's still on, I think that's your second, or it still says SABRES down on the left-hand side.
Okay, great. Okay, just want to make sure. I just saw a quick note in the corner, so I want to make sure you guys are still with me here.
Okay.
So I'm focusing in here on the levels of evaluation. As I said, the beauty of it is the QEEG portion. So looking under the hood, looking at brainwave activity, seeing how the brain is fired, how the brain is wired, how this is supporting the efforts of cognitive performance. And then essentially at the end, we don't just collect this data, but we sit down with the service member. We're able to actually have a conversation about it, connect the dots for them, and allow them to see what we're measuring, most oftentimes confirming what they're noting and making them, kind of reassuring what they're seeing as far as their performance. And then certainly connecting some of that symptomology to what they can do about it. So really becoming that hub and connector for them to the, vast variety of resources that are out there. to help them. So this is really getting at, just not just general cognitive performance, but overall well-being, looking at getting their most important equipment, their brain and their body, functioning at its highest level, and then providing them that actionable feedback of where can we go from here, and getting them connected to those resources that are available to them. So, if we have a program here, obviously at monitoring brain health and performance, we're going to want to have an intervention in our arsenal to get after that. And that is where the neurofeedback comes into play for us. So with this, we have a slide here just highlighting what neurofeedback's all about if you're not familiar with it. But essentially, using the QEEG, we're able to identify, using normative databases, of what's outside the boundaries. Where could their brainwave activity be excessive or diminished compared to a normative population? And of course, we use skilled performers as our population. Average isn't good enough for MARSOC. So once we identify that activity, we use operant and conditioning, just basic reinforcement with either an auditory or a visual reinforcer to encourage the brain to become more realigned, either rewarding, doing more of what we want to see more of, or squashing or inhibiting those areas that we want to diminish, such as distractibility or overthinking, and we'll talk more about that as we go. We do have multiple neurofeedback options at the ready. We have a neuro tracker system where it's a 3D activity where it really dials in that processing and focus capabilities. Also, more traditional QEEG measures looking at the surface, so being able to identify things like the frontal lobe that's looking at decision-making and focus, or the parietal area looking at processing and being able to re-regulate that activity and what's going on. And then we can also look at the connectivity as well with source training and identifying Brodmann areas and being able to associate those with different functionality. And then the other aspect is you can't ignore the mind-body connection in what's going on. So we always add in heart rate variability. So we're able to use that physiological state to set them up for success with their neurofeedback training, but really to help with balancing that physiology overall, because we know that that's having a great influence on the brain and the brain resources as well. So if we can get those paired up and in sync, it just makes our work more powerful with that. So with that, giving you a quick overview there, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. STARNES to talk about more specifically, how did the metrics play in? Because this certainly gave us a whole bucket of numbers to get after and to be able to see what we're doing and to see what movement we're finding. But as we got to dig into it, we realized that that was a bigger, heavier lift than we imagined. So she's going to take you through that story and give you a better idea of what we were working with.
Thanks, Amy. So I want to start off with the title of this slide, Why Metrics Matter. In the beginning of looking at this information, we were, honestly, still are, working on exploratory analyses. And in our previous webinar, we discussed some of our key performance indicators, things that we thought would be low-hanging fruit to be able to look for relationships, to be able to look and see what effect is having this neurofeedback intervention. What kind of effect is it having? What's resulting from it? Kind of the big question of, is it working? And what we found, and we already hit on this, like I said, in the first webinar, was that there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of different things going on. And we find in a lot of cases when we start trying to answer any questions with this data, that everything sort of gets washed out. It just kind of looks like a mess, to be completely honest with you. So we had to really start thinking about who we were working with and what the purpose behind working with each individual was. So big picture goals, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the outputs, the function, the processes, the goals of the individual people, and we're trying to identify where are there commonalities, where are there anomalies, are there subpopulations, are there groups of people by some other thing, and we want those questions answered for two main reasons. One is we still need to try to answer the question of whether the program, whether the intervention is working at all. The other is that although we currently have US population norms that we can use to help interpret the data that's collected when people undergo SABRs, we really still would like to get to the point of establishing either MARSOC norms or either MARSOC norms or SOCOM, Special Operations Command norms, so that we have a little bit better picture of how our folks are doing against people who are like them. I think then, Amy, we are ready for our next slide. So in the process of figuring out how we wanted to look at this, initially we tried looking at everybody together, and we really found nothing useful. You could look at profile plots and you could see that there were people that were behaving kind of similarly, but getting that to come out in a single analysis was not something that we were having very much success with. So when we really sat down and talked through what we were trying to do with the neurofeedback intervention, we realized that people come in for very similar reasons. They have similar goals. And ultimately what we did was we broke our neurofeedback population down into 5 outcome tracks. So these outcome tracks are determined based on why people are interested in pursuing the neurofeedback intervention. Neurofeedback is one of the potential recommendations that can be made to our operators and our other Marines and sailors once they undergo a SABRS assessment. If the recommendation is made and if they choose to participate, then some of the most common reasons that they might be choosing to participate are because they've noticed that they are having trouble with sleep and recovery. So maybe the quantity of sleep is off, the quality of sleep is off. That's a very common thing that we see that people are struggling with. Maybe they have an overactive or busy brain. Maybe they feel like stress is really messing with them. Maybe they're having trouble staying on task. Maybe they're having trouble with attention or with processing information. Maybe they're feeling like they have trouble with their memory. All of these are really common things that we find our people are struggling with when they choose to seek help through this neurofeedback intervention. So we break people into these 5 outcome tracks. I want to make a note that these outcome tracks are not mutually exclusive. So there are some people who are in more than one of the outcome tracks. And then we further selected which of the metrics we wanted to look at based on those outcome tracks, so that we're not looking at a metric that shouldn't have an effect on the particular outcome track that we're considering. Amy, let's go on and take a look at our neurofeedback population, our neurofeedback sample. So overall, we had 68 neurofeedback participants. The protocol for assessment with the neurofeedback people changed about how long ago, Amy? A year and a half ago, 2 years ago?
Probably. Yeah, I would say last fall.
So initially, folks who were undergoing the neurofeedback intervention were getting a baseline SABRS assessment and then getting a post neurofeedback assessment. So we had a pre and a post assessment that we could look at. Once the protocol changed, we began doing a midpoint assessment. So we have some individuals that have a pre and a post with no midpoint. We have some that have a pre and a midpoint, and we have a small handful of people that have pre, mid, and post assessments. And those numbers are in the first overall sample size box. In total, we have 68 individuals that we're able to consider. It's a small number of people for the amount of data that we have. So everything that we're seeing to this point, we still consider to be exploratory and consider to be ongoing. Our largest outcome track is the memory and processing track. There are 50 individuals in that. The smallest is the overactive brain, the busy brain, and the others kind of fall in between those. A couple of notes about the particular people that end up in this neurofeedback intervention. We tend to have more support personnel than soft qualified personnel in our neurofeedback intervention group so far. This is not necessarily representative of our population on the whole. We also tend to have people who are a little bit older, a little bit later in their career when they're choosing to go through the neurofeedback intervention. So just keep in mind that you're talking about people who are a little bit later career. Our median age is 36 for this neurofeedback group. And so these people have had time to accumulate lots of different life experiences, lots of different exposures. And so as we discuss how this is useful later, I would say let's keep that in mind. With that, we're ready to roll into taking a look at the results from our different outcome tracks. And I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. BAIR for that.
Thank you. So for each of our outcome tracks, we created these summary slides to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about as we break it down. So at the top, you'll see a definition for that outcome and what we're targeting and what it is. The blue underline is what we saw in the assessment data. So in that broader population, as we've been gathering this information, this is what we're getting out of it. And then from that, the arrowed bullet points are what changes and shifts we saw due to, potentially the neurofeedback intervention. But like Kat said, we know that there's some noise and some multiple resources that are attacking it. We certainly can't claim all the glory as we see these changes. We certainly believe in that holistic perspective and encourage to layer on a comprehensive approach to all these tracks. And what we're doing. But we wanted to at least share with you what we've seen with those various data points. For the purpose of time, we just pulled out some of the most interesting or noteworthy ones for the purpose of this presentation. As you saw, there's tens of thousands of numbers and means that we can get after as we look at this, and we'll continue to take that dive, and we're happy to share that information with others offline afterwards as well. So no surprise, we're starting with sleep and recovery as our first outcome track, and kind of digging into it, looking at the quantity and quality of sleep obviously is very important. We know that it's not something completely under the service members' control due to their training schedules, other demands. We know blast exposure certainly can be a major contributor to this. And when we're seeing them on that weekly basis, we know, and it's very observable, the performance hits that they're taking, whether it is performance outcomes or even just the physiology states. So kind of starting data-wise, looking at those changes when it comes to physiological state, heart rate variability and the SDNN, particularly from a practitioner view, And in my seat, this is where we can really look at, can we improve those energy resources and how they're expending them appropriately? How do we help them not think it's only a 0 or 100 option as far as they're totally on or totally off, but find that full range, manage that activation appropriately with that. Individual readings is where this is particularly helpful, looking at HRV. As you can see, you start putting it together, and this is one of those data challenges of it looking a little bit messier. But for sleep and recovery, certainly looking at the parasympathetic state, who's needing more rest and recovery, has they improved that stability with the SDNN metric and having that upward movement, hopefully demonstrates that they're better able to manage this tool of heart rate variability training, and fine tune and or initiate that rest and recovery as needed. So building that awareness and finding that full range to approach that. But then, as you can see, one of the challenges is we go from like baseline to mid and gain some good ground. We do see some dips in that post, and we have to acknowledge that. And we realize the challenge is that stability factor. There's a lot happening for our service members, particularly maybe when we're capturing that post-assessment measurement and capture. They could be leaving for deployment. They could have the stress of separation and retirement, or the excitement of that, depending on what's going on. And again, that could be affecting their sleep and recovery and other aspects that are happening here. Kat's going to get into some of those performance outputs here in the next 2 slides.
Thanks, Amy. So I did want to make a quick note that all of these graphs that you're seeing are profile plots. We've got means and standard errors that are estimates, but remember that all of this is exploratory. So swinging back around, now that I managed to get that back in, what we found from our SABRES population at large is that our service members tend to value accuracy over speed. So one of the things that we would like to see happening as we're taking a look at this neurofeedback population is an improvement in reaction time. So we would like to take this reaction time, which is measured in milliseconds, and we'd like to be seeing improvements of it. However, we know that accuracy is really important. So in addition to seeing that improvement in accuracy, or sorry, excuse me, improvement in reaction time, we don't want to lose accuracy. One of the things that we have been really excited to see as we've been looking through this data is that we are not only seeing improvements in reaction time, it's quicker. We also will see that there are some positive effects for higher order thinking. We also are finding that the accuracy improves along with the improved reaction time. So we're able to not only help people get faster, but to get more accurate, which is really important within the military population, especially if you're looking at folks who are likely to deploy into a combat environment. You want to do it right, and you want to do it fast, and you want to be able to do that together, because that's a very big factor in survivability. Amy, let's go on to take a look at executive function. So when we were looking at the measurement of executive function, we're looking at the, sorry, had to take a look at a note that I'd written down. We are looking at wanting our ability to do something under a task and to be able to do it as well as we possibly can. The algorithm that underlies this CNS vital signs executive function, which is what we have on the graph here, is the shifting attention test. So you're undergoing an exercise that has you doing something that's fairly difficult, and it's looking at how well can you do that? How many errors are you making? And so as we're improving the scores in this, we're making fewer errors in our decision-making process. And in general, we're seeing that happen pretty consistently over our time points, which is really exciting because, as Amy said earlier, sometimes we don't get to see that as people's situations change over the course of the time that they're undergoing the neurofeedback intervention. With that, we're going to move into our overactive brain, or our busy brain outcome track. So overactive brain is kind of the term that we've come up with for people who are struggling with anxious thinking, busy brain, those people who feel like they have a hamster on a wheel in their head and it just goes and goes and goes and goes all the time. So similarly to the sleep outcome track, we see that there are impacts of chronic fatigue and sleep impairment. We see a slight sympathetic and parasympathetic dominance. We see that these people typically have broad situational awareness and that they sacrifice speed for high accuracy. In short, at baseline, they're kind of similar, honestly, to our sleep folks. What we see then as they go through neurofeedback, though, is that their attention becomes more focused. They're able to move themselves to a more balanced state, which we can see through their HRV. And we see that their reaction time and their processing performance is able to improve because they're able to balance and focus themselves better and kind of quiet the noise. This is another place where we will see a pronounced improvement from pre to mid, but either plateau or regression from mid to post assessments. Again, we want to make a note that there are potential situational impacts, but then particularly with this subset, I also want to point out that this is a very small group. We only have 20 individuals in this. And so there's a lot of potential for just noise at this point. All right, Dr. BAIR, it's all you.
Great. So again, highlighting that mind-body connection, very important. If their mind is on overdrive, certainly we don't want their body feeding that overactivation as well. So looking at HRV training as a good conduit to help them with that. Getting them more centered and grounded is going to greatly improve that cognitive performance. And where we are seeing this is as we're getting that more balanced and as we're improving that stability, then they are able to quiet the mind. That is going to certainly improve their attention and attentional strategies, as well as that short-term memory improves. When you're in that overactive state, you're only worried about that immediate fire that you're putting out, and your brain is just not tracking anything else that might be potentially going on that they may need to remember at a later time. So they'll talk about that short-term memory suffering, and getting them more sounded and grounded not only improves that attention, but allows them to hold on to a lot of that short-term memory capacity that was lost previously. So looking at a theta beta ratio to help measure that attention. This is a measurement of focus, being able to dial that in. So those that are familiar with this concept, theta is that broad situational awareness. How much information are they taking in that given situation? Beta gives them that focal power and dialing that in. We want a good balance between the two. Ideally, falling about a 2.1 ratio is what you're getting at. And what we're seeing. And what's interesting in this group is you're seeing that they're trending at that lower mean to begin with, and then they even bring it in even tighter, which really I think is to their credit is how they're hyper focusing. And when you talk to the individuals, they'll say, I know I'm in such overdrive and I really have to just focus that in and get that tunnel vision going to compensate for that overactivation that's happening. So I think that could be a good promise when we look at the means here of that they didn't miss that target, but dialing that in is their strategy for being more successful with that. And then Kat's going to talk about more of those performance states and changes that we saw as well. So back to you, Kat.
We're looking at reaction time again in this group, and similarly to our sleep track, what we found is over time, the reaction time is going to improve largely with the skills gained in being able to quiet the brain. Also, as with the sleep track, we were really pleased to see that along with an improvement in reaction time, we also see improvements in accuracy. So to see those co-occurring is a really good, really positive thing to be seeing. The next performance outcome that we're looking at is cognitive flexibility. We find that this is another of the metrics that we see from the shifting attention exercise. So it gives us another lens on how we're doing from that ability to make few errors when you're in the middle of the decision-making process for a given task. One note on this, at baseline, our cognitive flexibility is on the lower end of the population norm. So as we're able to move this up and improve that cognitive flexibility, then it gives our folks that greater clarity and greater agility, which is helpful for them. All right, our next outcome track is the stress track, and I'm going to turn this one over to Amy. It's a big one.
All right, we all know stress is messy, to say the least. Changes daily, varies greatly. There's times when we get out of bed and we are a stress ninja, and there's times that one thing just crushes us for our entire day. So this is a tough one to tackle, and we know that it, again, takes that multimodal intervention to get at it, but we want to help and see what we can do and what changes we saw with our neurofeedback clients with this. So thinking about stress and the definition of stress and how we want to look at it is that perception of the pressure that they're feeling, and then that body's response to that demand or threat that exceeds their ability to cope. So we know that there is, a definite neuro effect to that. This can either overcharge the brain and give us that overactive brain, that busy brain that we just spoke about, or this could kill that firing power. If they're just so stressed and overwhelmed and just feeling about life, they're going to lose that good juice that's going to get that brain firing effectively. So we can see where this is going to get us all over the place when it comes to the data. And then again, with stress and situational impacts, we're not going to probably be too effective at totally eliminating stressors. Again, this is similar to sleep, where it's what is controllable. And really our main attack at this is how do we improve their resiliency, and maybe not eliminate the stressors, but eliminate that perception of it and their ability to stay strong despite it. So getting into the theta beta ratio, we'll talk about that focus, and Kat's going to jump in from here.
So we noticed that for stress, we have a little bit higher theta beta ratio than we had in our previous outcome track, which was our overactive brain, busy brain track. So our folks here tend to have a little bit broader situational awareness. We want to help these folks be able to focus a little bit better, and to try to drown out some of the noise that comes from having a lot of different stressors kind of coming in at you. One of the things that we can see when we look at this plot is we see a lot of lines crisscrossing in different directions. So we find that this is a particularly challenging place to try to make sense of the information that we have. So on an individual level, we're able to really help people dial in towards getting themselves where they need to go. But in aggregating it, it's a lot harder for us to be able to really answer the question of whether on aggregate, are we helping people dial in? So that one is still a little bit up in the air, and one that is on our horizon for further investigation as we continue to have people complete the intervention and add more assessments to our data set. All right, Amy, over to you to talk about the HRV and peak alpha frequency for these guys.
So rinse and repeat with HRV. As we know, we're continuing to try to increase that SDNN metric and hope to see that continue to stabilize, demonstrating how they're building effective coping strategies to offset the demands and improving their resiliency. So no surprises there. But a new metric we haven't talked about here is peak alpha frequency. And I really love these conversations around this, because this really looks at that processing capacity. How are they uploading, downloading information? How are they managing large bits of data? What is that kind of brain's idle speed run at for them? Are they, fast as it comes, they can take it in and that, drink from the fire hose? Or are they more of that slower, deliberate, want to digest, want to take it in smaller chunks kind of person? And we found from our just general population assessment is they're in a happy Goldilocks range around 10. So not too fast and hypervigilant, not too slow, but are able to kind of crank at a good balanced power. And you can see here that if they're already in an okay range, we don't see dramatic movement. We see a little bit more of that flatlining going. Now, this is also one that has a very tight range. Generally speaking, the numbers run between 9 and 11 when it comes to the hertz here. So only a 1/10 of a decimal change can make a big difference and feel a lot different for them. But to demonstrate that in the data can get really lost. So again, showing where this data cannot maybe tell the best story. But we really like that peak alpha frequency, because for longitudinal basis, where are they saying, hey, I used to be that faster guy and really quick as a whip, and now I'm feeling like that capacitor is starting to slow down, and they're cranking at that much lower speed. So we're excited about this metric over the longer haul, and certainly helping tell that story as we continue to monitor our service members in regards to that. And with attention as an outcome track, we've really talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I do want to emphasize understanding dimensions of attention is another conversation in getting after this. That broad versus narrow aspect, that internal versus external voice that's going on, and what they're attending to. Where are they putting that flashlight of focus? The difference between focus and concentration. So being able to know what they're attending to, talking about concentration as the time duration. They can pick that focal, but it's very fleeting, versus they can get really dialed in for a long period of time, but they might pick the wrong target for that. So these are key educational elements and conversations to have to broaden that self-awareness in this aspect. And then when we're looking at their brainwave activity, how's their brain wired? Where are those preferences coming out to be their comfort zone, to be that go-to attentional strategy that their brain falls into? And then how can we use neurofeedback to help shift that, help find that balance, give them that practice and ability to better direct it for us? So looking in these categories just very quickly, to keep us on track, that theta beta ratio of focus. Here's where this, again, the means can be very misleading. We fall in that sweet spot of 2.1 because we have those guys that are super high thetas and that higher ratio, and we have that very low super focused, and they meet somewhere and converge in the middle. So those extreme sides are represented here, and then you can see where it just kind of, tightens up or will tighten up, hopefully for us. And then Kat's going to talk about the concepts of sustained attention and shifting attention that we've touched on a little bit, but has some variability measures to address for us here too. Kat?
So previously, we've been talking about reaction time, the actual reaction time. In this particular outcome track, one of the things that we wanted to show to you all was the reaction time variability. So this reaction time variability is measured during a 10-minute test. It's a long test. It's a hard test. It's a frustrating test. And so this is giving us a really good picture of how well can someone sustain their attention throughout this task. What we see is that we have movement towards a smaller variability, which means that people are able to sustain their attention and to do that with better consistency, which is great news for everybody. We look at the cognitive flexibility on the next slide. What we're seeing here, similar to what we saw before, we're wanting to be able to shift attention. We're wanting to see improvements in that. This is another place where there's a little bit of spaghetti going on in the data, but the general movement is towards improved cognitive flexibility, which means that that shifting attention, that ability to shift from thing one to thing two to potentially thing three is getting better as people are going through the neurofeedback intervention. Our last outcome track is our memory and processing outcome track. This is our largest group, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. BAIR to talk about what you need to know about it.
Yeah, certainly an all-encompassing of the individual tracks that we've talked about to date and what we've covered, because this is the brain's supporting mechanism for cognitive performance. So we're going to see a lot of overlay. Memory is a common complaint when you ask them, what are their top concerns? What are they noticing? So that is why that kind of hits the mark, but you really got to start pulling the threads on, is it more attention? Because attention is the first step of memory. So if they're having issues paying attention, it's not necessarily not holding on to the information. They just didn't make it important for their brain to grasp on the front end. And if we work on attention, then that will clean up memory naturally. Also, with sleep deprivation, we know that that's widely known with our population. No surprises there, and a big contributor. REM sleep during that later quality and quantity of hours is when memory consolidation happens, processing systems clean up and prime themselves, and we are better able to receive and store information when we're sleeping more effectively. So obviously that sleep is going to have a big impact on this area. So when we're looking at the data, we could really pull anything and everything into this category. But just to give you a quick look into the various mechanisms to process information and what we thought were some interesting takes. If we talk about working memory, this is a great example because here's a multi-component model where working memory requires the mental workspace, the brain resources, the effort. That's all could be limited or impacted by all these numerous factors that we've been talking about and why that there can be such variability. So again, then I turn to Kat and I say, hey, give me some numbers to show this. This can be really, a challenging model to dissect. So I just want to give her a chance to explain that more.
So Amy mentioned when she was introducing this memory and processing outcome track that there are a lot of different things involved in why someone might be feeling like they're having trouble with memory or feeling like they're having trouble with processing. And so one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, but we do need to mention, is that there are lots of potential covariates and potential confounders in all of these, but it's particularly a concern here with this memory and processing track because all of the other outcome tracks that we've talked about can have a hand in whether someone is struggling with memory or processing. So peeking ahead a little bit to our future directions, one of the things that is on our plate for the future is to try to start addressing those potential overlaps and potential confounders so that we can maybe tease apart a little bit more what's going on behind the curtain. The next thing for this memory group that we wanted to take a look at was the peak alpha frequency. For the memory group, we see that this really, on average, stays really flat. Most of our folks are within that kind of ideal range from the broader general population. So in general, that means that our people are in good shape in terms of managing information efficiently, in terms of that like base capability to process and manage information. So that's good news. But in terms of our ability to impact that at-rest ability to process information, there's sort of this question: is this the right metric, or is it just a part of how people process information that we're not impacting? That's something that we have left as an outstanding question here. The last thing that we wanted to take a look at for our memory and processing group is this ERP 300 beta latency. What we are looking at here is that we have people that are all over the board. This really does look like spaghetti. Our latency is this ability to process information once people start doing a task. So if it takes longer than you would expect to do the task, what kind of delay are we seeing? What kind of latency are we seeing? And you can see here that we might have some improvements on aggregate, maybe, but because we have people that are all over the board, it's kind of hard to tell for sure. However, one of the things that we do know about this population is that they have a lot of exposures to blasts. We know that they have a lot of exposures to things that can potentially cause concussion or TBI. So one of our goals in having this intervention available to people is for them to be able to engage in it earlier in the career. This is, again, one of those future directions. Can we get people to participate and engage earlier career so that we can potentially build up a protective effect, knowing the kinds of exposures that they have? So, Amy, let's move on to our next steps, and we'll try to wrap up fairly quickly. Our next steps, obviously, we have a lot of data challenges that we've mentioned. Hopefully, many of those we'll be able to address as the sample size increases. We mentioned earlier that we have multiple types of neurofeedback interventions that we're using. We need to dig further into those to see if there is a particular protocol or protocols that are best practices for our folks or for a particular outcome track. We have some exciting potentials for looking at blast exposure in combination with the SABRES data and looking at the holistic service utilization of things like the preservation of the force and family program with the SABRES data to see if there is an effect of holistic practice in terms of how people do over the course of their career. And we have a pilot study utilizing a mobile neurofeedback device, which we're really excited about because that gives us the potential for delivery of intervention to a much broader group of folks. All right. Finally, we're going to take a look at our conclusions. So we had multiple metrics that targeted the performance outcomes in brain physiology. We get a really unique understanding of brain health and performance. We are excited to continue to look at the story of what's happening as we work with our people. We believe that we are seeing positive shifts. We believe that we're not able to directly work with the folks to help them get to people who can, whether that's into a more clinical situation or maybe into another area that they're finding that they're having issues with, maybe nutrition, maybe something like a physical therapist, depending on the underlying source of their challenges. We are currently primarily working with folks in the office. We recognize that improvements in performance in a controlled setting may or may not demonstrate the effects in a real life environment. And so we're looking forward to ways that we might be able to answer those questions in the future, but also looking forward just to the feedback that we get from our folks that say that they find the improvements that we're able to measure in the controlled environment in their day-to-day life. So with that, I think we are ready for our Q&A. I think we have only just a couple of minutes. We really appreciate your time. And if you have questions, you're welcome to contact Dr. BAIR or myself directly. Our contact information is up on the screen, or there's a mechanism for you to ask questions through PH.D. So with that, I am going to stop talking, and we'll take just a couple of questions before the end of the session.
Okay, great. Thank you, Drs. BAIR and STARNES. And yeah, we tried to do a rapid fire of some of the questions that were submitted. But as Dr. STARNES just alluded to, HDIAC does have a technical inquiry service for anybody that is doing government-funded research for any branch of the government. We are government-funded ourselves, so we support the government S&T community. And if you'd like to submit a technical inquiry for us to respond to based on this or any other technical area you might be researching, we welcome that. And I'd love to have a chance to answer those questions. So the first question that I have here, did you run field trials? We noticed that intra-individual variability between lab tests and field tests is greater than the variability between subjects. The performance also tends to be extremely task-specific, with often little to no correlation with the lab results.
All of this is done in the office, so no field trials at this point. I'm not quite sure what the delivery mechanism for an assessment in the field would be, to be honest with you. Amy, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, and that's one of those next steps, right? We're able to capture this in that office environment, but what is that translatability? What would actual reaction time, response time look like in even a virtual setting where they're, responding to targets or things along those lines? So this is just where the technology is going to help us be more effective at capturing actual performance. And but neurocognitive testing, I did see in comparison with the Virtra, which is one of those simulation systems, they're able to see that there is a good representation of what you're seeing on computer tests and what you're seeing in the real environment. So we expect there to be a good correlation there moving forward.
All right, thank you. And then regarding the 3 different evaluations that you're showing on several of the charts, are they 3 different evaluations, or is it 3 time periods within the program?
Yeah, sorry, I should have clarified that. So all of our clients are on an individual scheduling basis. So they will do typically about 15 to 20 sessions of neurofeedback, but we let the individual dictate what they need and then use the assessments as a means to monitor. So we figure out a midpoint based on their neurofeedback numbers and run that midpoint at an appropriate time, and then that post-assessment when they're either completing or separating from us on the back end. So it will vary for that person as far as the actual time. So it's not like a absolute everyone gets this at 6 months, but those are just those time periods that we're trying to capture that information.
Okay, then I think that kind of answers the next question I had, which says, what is the time frame the data you're showing was collected? But it sounds like that could vary person to person during the course of your study.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, and then probably the last question we'll really have time to get to. I really apologize to everybody, but at what point in the latency do you no longer consider it a 300B and think that it might be a later waveform?
Good point. So when we're capturing our ERPs, we are actually capturing 300A with looking at their attention to the stimulus, then the 300B, and also visual processing with the N100. So this is the beauty of SABRES, allowing us to look at it from various aspects. So if we're seeing significant delays in the processing or low amplitude power with the processing, is that presenting itself in the peak alpha frequency? Are we seeing it in the brainwave activity and supporting a deficit that would be creating that delay there, or an overactivation? So this is where our program really allows us to not just have that one lens that we have to worry about, but really where we rely on the big picture of what are we seeing in totality and how we can get after it. So as I said, again, the challenges of what we're doing, and we've just only begun to pull these together, but we appreciate the opportunity to start having you point out these great questions and think about things from these different perspectives. So we'll continue to look at that, but that's kind of our initial take on it.
All right, great. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do, I will take the remaining questions that were posted in the Q&A and the chat. I do get a kind of printout of that from WebEx, and I can collate that together and try to get some of the questions over to Drs. BAIR and STARNES. Since we are over time, want to respect everybody's time. And certainly this webinar will be posted on YouTube on the HDIAC channel, probably by Monday, if not even later today. So go there if you want to catch up on something, and certainly feel free to submit us a technical inquiry if you have follow-up questions. But with that, Drs. BAIR and STARNES, thank you for 2 tremendous webinars.
Thanks so much for having us. I do want to point out we have a multiple reference page here as well that might answer some of your questions, because it captures some of the supporting work and references of why we set the program up the way that we did. Also, some future directions and other great work and efforts that are going on out there. Not an all-inclusive, but to give you a good starting point. So check that out as well, and certainly feel free to circle back with us. We're sorry we just have so much to share in a short time, but we'll be happy to have any one-off conversations with anyone, and welcome the feedback. So reach out. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.